I never planned to look for a place to stay in Asheville. I had not been back since the memorial service 9 months earlier, and I told myself I was not ready. That was the word everyone kept using in those first months after my daughter died. Ready. As if grief were a door you could walk through when the timing suited you. What made me go back was the trail. There is a creek crossing on the Rough Ridge Loop, above the Blue Ridge Parkway, where the water comes down fast in October and the rocks are slick and green and beautiful in a way that is almost cruel given what happened there. My daughter used to say the sound of that water was the closest thing she knew to absolute quiet. She went there alone on a Saturday morning in late September, the way she had done dozens of times before, and she did not come back down. The official report called it an accidental fall. She slipped at the crossing, struck her head on a granite ledge. She was found by another hiker 4 hours later. The report was thorough and the language was clinical, and I tread it 3 times on the night the sheriff's deputy brought it to my house in Greenville, and then I folded it and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk, and I did not look at it again. I want to tell you about my daughter before I tell you what I found, because what I found means nothing if you do not first understand what I lost. Leah was 33 years old when she died. She taught art to 7th and 8th graders at a middle school in West Asheville, and she was the kind of teacher who stayed late on Tuesdays to run an after-school drawing club for kids who had nowhere else to be. She drove a 10-year-old Subaru with a cracked bumper and a sketchbook on the passenger seat that she went through every few months. She grew herbs in cedar window boxes on her front porch, rosemary, basil, 2 kinds of thyme, and she called me every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, without fail, to talk about whatever was on her mind. Sometimes it was school. Sometimes it was a book she was reading. Sometimes it was just the light that morning, the way the fog sat in the valley below her house, and she wanted to describe it to someone who would actually listen. Her mother passed 6 years ago, a stroke, fast and without warning. Leah drove the 3 hours from Asheville to Greenville the night it happened, and she stayed with me for a full week without being asked. She slept in her old bedroom and made coffee in the mornings, and sat with me at the kitchen table through the silences that had no bottom. I do not have the right words for what that meant. I only know that after Leah died, I understood for the first time what it means to be completely without anchor. My wife was gone. My daughter was gone. I was 66 years old, and I did not know what to do with the quiet. My son-in-law handled the arrangements after Leah died. He was organized and composed in a way I could not be. He coordinated the memorial, dealt with the insurance company, made the phone calls I wasn't capable of making. He told me he would handle everything related to the house and that I should not worry. He said the memories were too much for him to deal with right away. He said, "Give me time, Dad." He had called me that since he and Leah married 5 years earlier, and I had always liked hearing it. I gave him time. 9 months. I gave him 9 months. In late June, I decided I needed to go back to Asheville. Not to the house, just to the trail. I wanted to stand at that creek crossing and be in the place where Leah had last been. Because grief will take you to strange places when the alternative is sitting still in the same chair. I started looking for a place to stay online, sorting through rentals by neighborhood, when the algorithm on one of those booking sites showed me a listing about 6 blocks from where my daughter had lived. I almost scrolled past it. The thumbnail was a living room with good morning light coming through wide windows. Then I stopped. I knew those windows. I had helped Leah strip the old paint off those window frames with a heat gun on a hot Saturday in August 2 summers before she died. We had argued the whole afternoon about the right technique, and she laughed at me when I burned a corner of the molding. I knew the way the light came through them in the morning, because she had described it to me on a Sunday phone call and then sent me a photograph. I clicked on the listing. The host name was my son-in-law's name. I set my phone down on the kitchen table, very slowly. I picked it up again and looked at every photograph in the listing. The living room, the kitchen with the open shelving Leah had installed herself over a long weekend, the back deck with a small table and 2 chairs I did not recognize. The herb boxes on the front porch, still there in the photos, though I could see that the rosemary had died back and not been tended. My daughter's house, listed at $185 a night. There were 47 reviews. I did not call my son-in-law. I put my phone in my shirt pocket, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. Then I thought of something I hadn't thought about in months. When Leah and I restored that house together, she had installed a Nest thermostat. She set me up with access to the account because she traveled sometimes in winter and wanted me to be able to check that the pipes weren't in danger. Just look in on it once in a while in January, Dad, okay? I don't want the pipes to freeze. Those were her exact words. The login was still on my phone. I opened the app. The thermostat showed the house at 71 degrees. It was occupied. The usage history loaded. The house had been running, heat cycling, cooling cycling, someone living there and running the dishwasher and the shower for the past 6 months without interruption. Not a house sitting empty in grief and silence. A house where someone had been making themselves comfortable since at least January. I did not drive to Asheville that night. I drove the next morning, before 5, the way Leah and I used to leave early when we had a full work weekend planned. I came slowly down her street in the dark before sunrise. The lights were off inside, but there was a car in the driveway I did not recognize. Dark green SUV, newer model. My son-in-law drove a pickup. I parked at the end of the block. I sat there long enough for the sky to start going gray. Then I drove back to Greenville. Let me back up. Let me tell you what my son-in-law had said and what he had not said, because the gap between those two things is where everything important lies. After Leah's memorial, I had called him about the house once a month, roughly. Each time, he told me he was working with an attorney and that the estate was complicated. He said Leah had not left things entirely in order, which I accepted because I didn't know enough to question it. He said the property would take time to settle properly. He said he would keep me informed. Every conversation ended with him thanking me for my patience and calling me Dad, and me hanging up feeling vaguely grateful that someone was managing it, because I was not in a state to manage anything in those months. What he did not tell me was that he had listed the house on Airbnb 3 months after the funeral. He did not tell me he had filed an application to transfer sole ownership of the property to himself in a quiet court filing I was never notified about, despite the fact that Leah's will named me as secondary executor. He did not tell me that Leah had updated her will 8 months before she died. I did not know about that update until my attorney found it. The morning after my drive to Asheville, I called my attorney. His name is Ron, and he has handled my personal affairs for the better part of 15 years, ever since I needed help with a property dispute that turned out to be simple, but taught me to have someone I trusted in my corner. I told him everything. The listing, the Nest account, the car in the driveway, the 47 reviews. Ron listened without saying a word. When I finished, he said, "Don't contact him yet. Don't let him know what you've seen. Send me the listing link." Then he said, "I need to look at the estate documents, all of them." Over the following 4 weeks, Ron found the following. Leah had updated her will in January of the year she died. The updated will included a provision that the house, if she died without surviving children and the estate was not properly administered, would revert to me. She had also written in a clause naming me as secondary executor, with authority to act if the primary executor, her husband, was found to have taken actions contrary to the estate's interests. Ron believed that clause had been triggered, clearly and several times over. The Airbnb income, 11 months of bookings at $185 a night, roughly 60% occupancy, had not been reported to the estate or disclosed in any accounting my son-in-law had provided. The money had gone directly into a personal account in his name alone. A joint credit card that had been part of the marital estate had been used, in the months after Leah's death, to purchase the patio furniture I had seen on the deck in the photographs, along with a kayak registered to his address, and several $1,000s of what Ron described as everyday personal expenses. Groceries, restaurants, a gym membership renewed in October, the month after my daughter was buried. The ownership transfer filing had been submitted without notifying me as secondary executor. Ron said it had been scheduled for a routine approval hearing, the kind that clears without scrutiny when no one knows to object. We had found it with roughly 3 weeks to spare. And the woman whose green SUV was in the driveway. Ron found archived social media posts, since deleted, that showed her and my son-in-law at a restaurant in downtown Asheville. The post was from 11 months before my daughter died. A dinner the caption described as celebrating her promotion at the same firm where the two of them worked. I read that, and I had to go stand in my backyard for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what those weeks felt like. Not because honesty is comfortable, but because I think it is the only thing that makes a story like this worth telling. I felt grief, and I felt rage, and underneath both of them I felt something I had no name for. A retroactive rearrangement of everything I thought I understood. I thought about the creek crossing on the Rough Ridge Trail, the one my daughter had done many times. I thought about the fact that my son-in-law had told me he'd planned to go with her that morning, but had to cancel at the last minute because of a work call. I thought about the medical examiner's note that said the fall was consistent with a slip, and I thought about what consistent with means and what it does not rule out. I thought about an experienced hiker on a familiar trail on a dry September morning. I did not say any of this to Ron. He handles estates and contracts, not investigations. I told him only what he needed to do his job. What I said to Ron was, protect everything that rightfully belongs to the estate. Document every unauthorized action. Find every account, every transaction, every asset that moved without authorization, and tell me every option available to me under North Carolina law. He said give him 30 days. I gave him 22. In those 22 days, I went back to Asheville twice, not to confront anyone, not yet. The first time, I parked on a side street in the early morning and I watched. A woman came out of my daughter's front door at 7:30, got into the green SUV, and drove away without looking in my direction. The herb boxes on the porch were still there. The rosemary was gone to dry sticks. The basil was long dead. Nobody had touched them. The second time, I walked the property line behind the house along the back alley, staying behind the tree line, and I took my own photographs, the deck furniture. A new light fixture above the back door that had not been there when Leah was alive. I took those photographs not because Ron needed them, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, not through a small phone screen. Because my daughter had stood in that backyard and showed me where she planned to add a small sunroom off the kitchen. Once she'd saved enough, she had a sketch of it. She had told me about the morning light it would catch. I needed to be on the same ground where she had stood. Ron filed the petition on a Tuesday morning. He sent a certified letter to my son-in-law's attorney listing everything. The Airbnb income withheld from the estate, the credit card expenditures, the ownership transfer filing, the failure to notify the secondary executor, the conflict of interest provision in the updated will. The letter included a formal demand to cease all further actions related to the estate property, a full accounting of all income and expenditures since my daughter's death, and notification that a probate petition had been filed requesting the appointment of an independent administrator. My son-in-law received the letter on a Wednesday. His attorney called Ron by Wednesday afternoon. My son-in-law called me on Friday evening. I let it go to voicemail. I sat at my kitchen table, the same chair, and I listened to his voice. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. He started with my name and then came the words I expected. I know how this looks. He said he had been meaning to talk to me. He said the rental income had been going toward the mortgage, which Ron had already confirmed was false. The mortgage had been paid separately from the estate account the entire time. He said he was grieving, too, in his own way. He said he hoped I could understand. I listened to every second of it. Then I set the phone face down on the table, and I did not call him back. The probate hearing was held 7 weeks later in Buncombe County. I want to tell you about that day, because it is the part of this story I go back to most often. The judge was a man in his late 50s who wore his reading glasses at the end of his nose, and reviewed documents with the steady patience of someone who has seen every version of this kind of thing and is not surprised by any of it. I found that oddly steadying. Ron presented the evidence methodically. The Airbnb records, the credit card statements, the ownership transfer filing, the updated will, the executor clause. My son-in-law sat across the room with his attorney. He was dressed carefully, his face was still. He did not look at me once. At one point, the judge looked up from the credit card statement and said, without particular expression, this charge, the kayak, that was purchased 4 months after your wife passed. It was not exactly a question. My son-in-law's attorney said, Your Honor, and the judge said, I'm noting it for the record. The ruling came 14 days later. The ownership transfer was voided. The Airbnb account was frozen, pending an audit. The credit card account was ordered closed and referred for a complete accounting. An independent administrator was appointed to oversee the estate. My son-in-law was ordered to vacate the property within 45 days and to provide a full reconciliation of all income and expenditures since my daughter's death, including every dollar of rental revenue. Ron called me at home with the ruling. I was sitting in the kitchen. After a moment I said, What about the other matter? He knew what I meant. I had told him, a few weeks into our work together, about the things that had been sitting in the bottom of my mind since I'd read the accident report for the 3rd time. The trail she knew well, the canceled plan, the note in the examiner's report. I hadn't asked him to do anything with it. I just needed someone else to be holding it alongside me. Ron said, That's a different conversation. Different process, different people. He paused. I know someone, though. An investigator. Good one. Former law enforcement. He gave me a name. I made a call. I will not tell you what has come from that call. Not yet, because it is still ongoing and I have been told clearly to be patient. Patience is something grief teaches you, slowly and at considerable cost. I am still learning it, but I am learning. The house came to me in October, 8 weeks after the ruling. That had always been the provision in Leah's updated will. She had put it there deliberately, Ron believed, because she had understood something about her marriage that she had not shared with me, and she had wanted to make sure that what she had built could not be taken from the people who had helped her build it. She had not counted on me stumbling across the Airbnb listing while looking for a weekend rental. She had not counted on the thermostat account she had set up herself and handed me access to with a casual, "Just check the pipes in January, okay?" Those were her words. I can still hear exactly how she said them. I do not believe that was an accident. I have stopped believing in accidents the way I once did. The first weekend I spent at the house, I went directly to the porch. The herb boxes were still there, all 4 of them, the long cedar ones she had built herself. I cleared out everything that had died. I drove to a nursery on Merriman Avenue and bought rosemary starts and a flat of basil and 2 kinds of thyme, the same varieties, because I still had the photograph she had texted me of the original planting, and I could read the label text in the background if I enlarged it. I planted them the way she had shown me, packed in tight, watered them from the old metal watering can that was still in the shed out back. The front door had been repainted at some point in the past 9 months. Flat charcoal gray, a builder's neutral, the color of nothing particular. Leah had kept it red. She had spent a long time picking that red. I had been on the phone with her at the hardware store while she held sample cards up to the window light, and she had painted it herself on a cool afternoon in November, called me afterward to report that her hands had stayed red for 3 days. I repainted the door. Not red. Red felt like something I couldn't restore exactly, something that belonged to a specific afternoon I could not go back to. I painted it the color Leah had been considering for the shutters the last time we talked about the house. A deep blue-green, the color of creek water in the Smokies in September, when the light is low and the moss is full. She had called it almost teal, but not quite, and then laughed at herself for not being able to name it more precisely. I found the closest match I could at the hardware store, applied 2 coats on a Sunday in late October, and stood at the end of the front walk and looked at it in the afternoon light, and thought that it would have made her argue with me for 20 minutes, and then eventually come around. I have been going to the house most weekends since October. There is always something to do. A gutter that needed rehinging, a section of the back fence that had rotted through, the herb boxes that want attention every few weeks. It is the kind of ongoing, never-finished work that my daughter understood better than I did, and that I am coming to understand again. One Saturday in November, I was standing in the backyard before 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee, in the exact spot where Leah had shown me the sketch for the sunroom. The frost was still on the grass. The light was coming low and sideways over the ridge and hitting the back of the house in that way it does in November, long and the color of something I don't have the right word for. I found myself talking to her, not praying exactly, just talking, the way you do when someone is gone and the silence grows larger than any room you know how to fill. I told her about the probate ruling. I told her about the herb boxes, that I had matched the varieties from the photograph she sent me 2 years ago. I told her about the door color and that she would probably have a better name for it than I do. I told her I was going to build the sunroom in the spring when the ground was right. I told her I had found her sketchbook. I had kept it after she died and had not been able to open it until recently, and that the sketch was good. That she had thought it through carefully. That her measurements were almost exactly what I would have chosen myself. I told her I was sorry I did not pay closer attention. That I trusted when I should have been watching. That I gave time to someone who was using every one of those months against us both. The frost was burning off by then. A pair of cardinals came to the feeder she had hung from the back eave. She had told me about that feeder once on a Sunday call, and I had found it empty my first weekend there and refilled it. I sat down on the back step with my coffee, and I looked at the space where the sunroom will go, and I thought about my daughter. I thought about the sketchbook on the passenger seat of her car. The Sunday morning calls and the way she described fog in a valley, the 2 kinds of time, and the proper way to use a heat gun on old window molding, and the sound of water over rocks that she said was the closest thing she knew to absolute quiet. I thought about what she had put in place before she died. The updated will, the executor clause, the careful attention she had given to what should happen to what she had built. She did not know what was coming. Nobody knows what is coming. But she was a careful woman who sketched things before she built them, and read the labels, and called when she said she would call. She thought about January and frozen pipes, and what would happen if she was not there to manage things herself. I want to say something to you directly, whoever you are, wherever you are watching from right now. I almost scrolled past that listing. The thumbnail looked like any other rental. Good light, clean room, nothing that should have made me stop. I was tired, and I had been looking at listings for 20 minutes, and I almost kept going. But something made me look twice. And when I looked twice, I recognized those windows. And when I recognized those windows, everything that came after became possible. Look twice. Open the account you haven't checked in months. Go back to the place. The truth does not get tired of waiting. It is more patient than the people working to bury it. It accumulates in thermostat histories and archived social media and old credit card records, one small piece at a time, until the morning you sit down with your phone and the whole shape of it finally comes into focus. My daughter was a careful woman. She built things to last. She planned for the future while the rest of us were still standing in the present, trying to figure out how to get through the week. I am going to spend however much time I have left being grateful that she taught me some of that.